right, so in the last week, there have been some very exciting deals announced. And I figured let's break them down as Peter from a venture capital standpoint, myself as an entrepreneur, and like what we like and what we don't like about the deals, and just like what's happening in the market right now in the land of VC.
Sweet, let's do this thing.
All right, so I don't actually know how to say this. Bukukas. They just raised $50 million. So far, they've raised a total of about $63.5 million. Their last fund was only a few months ago, was $10 million. The one before that was $3.5 million.
Sounds like they're growing really quick, gaining a lot of attention.
My understanding is what they do is they're more of like they're helping companies become more digitized, go more online, specifically around the lines of financial accounting.
So they're based in Indonesia. They're helping small and medium-sized businesses in Indonesia get online and be more digitized. I would imagine the market is kind of similar to India. What do you think of that opportunity, having lived there?
So I can't speak specifically for India because I don't use that many localized applications. In India for finance, I use QuickBooks, and they have a version specifically for that market. I think one of the things I like here is, so when I first got into like tech startup, the things that I looked at specifically for was what are models that worked well in the US and where ones kind of go overseas. And I don't know if that playbook exists anymore. I see similarities, but here I think the slant that they have is, I think it's much easier to have a marketing platform go global, but I think with finance applications, with specifically individual tax laws, payment gateways, I think there's probably a fairly defensible moat, at least for the next 10 years, around models like this. Picking countries that are large enough and building financial applications specifically for them. And especially in this country, they're saying that 60% of all businesses are SMBs, and most of them aren't digitized. And so, I mean, like right now, if you said, John, here's a country that has a similar blueprint, here's $10 million, it would be tempting to go try it out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, look, you've got, I would imagine that in Indonesia that smartphone adoption's pretty deep. And so you have a lot of consumers that are, digital savvy and have access to sufficient technology. So it makes a ton of sense that you would offer a lot of services that really bring even the smallest business into the 21st century from a digital perspective, right? I think I look at this as a lot like a Square, right? Probably Square wouldn't have been successful in this market, when it launched in the US because the digital adoption wasn't there, but I think the digital adoption is probably there at this point, right? And probably for most of these markets, and for me, the question would be more of timing. Sure. But it feels like now is the right timing, right? For this type of business.
I think there would still, if I was building it, it'd be a very light application. I probably would go mobile first. Most of these companies don't even have regular web browsers. Actually, I don't know if I would go mobile first, and I don't know if I would even have an app, primarily because a lot of these people have very limited space on their phones.
And limited bandwidth too, I'm sure.
And limited bandwidth. At least in India, bandwidth is fairly cheap. It's cheap compared to the US, but it might be cheap in my mind just as a foreigner. So that may not be a fair comparison, but I think, because in India specifically, like when you go to make an online payment, I'm not typically plugging it through like the US merchants or like Stripes. They use Razorpay and others, and that gives them a fair amount of defensibility, I think, specific to their market or similar markets if you were looking at it. I think one of the things that was interesting is that Sequoia funded this deal, but it doesn't look like they were in the latest round of $50 million, which makes me wonder. I've heard a lot of VCs get upset where they'll give someone like $10 million, and they're like, this should last you for the next 2 years. And then the next thing you know, a startup goes and raises $50 million. And some funds like Sequoia in the past have expressed that they're a little bit upset, but I think some startups are like, hey, if we can raise the money now and it's at a good rate, like why not do it now?
Yeah, it's a good question. It doesn't really indicate whether or not they participated. I would guess that Sequoia would have participated.
Well, they've done 2 rounds back to back. So if we come to this article right here, wait, not that one.
They might have.
The other one was 3 months.
I mean, the other 2 investors noted are a DoorDash executive and the CEO of TransferWise, which, look, TransferWise is a great, very successful business, as is DoorDash, but I would be surprised if those 2 individuals combined wrote a $50 million check into the business.
What do you think about the concept? Like, if you look at what their core is, they're a small business, or they help small businesses go online. How much longer do you think that is going to be a trend? Like, I would have expected that trend to have been over.
Well, I think in most developed markets it is over. I think in developing markets like Indonesia, it clearly hasn't played out yet.
Okay. All right, let's go to Merge. They just raised $4.5 million to help specifically with integrations. And as I've read through this, they look like they're kind of like a Zapier specifically for the HR space.
Mm-hmm.
So they have much more of like a Plaid-like component where they're connecting deep financial APIs, lots of security, lots of compliance, but trying to make a lot of these apps fairly connected.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think the thing that really stood out to me was when they talked about how Salesforce, is this really big player. They've got a lot of market share. They clearly have arguably a fairly robust API. And yet customers are saying they'd rather use Merge's product over Salesforce's API because it's just so much easier to use and work with. I think at the end of the day, things are only going to continue to become more and more and more interconnected, and customers are starting to, have been for a long time, but almost it's table stakes now, right? Like you have to be able to integrate across a wide range of data sources. What I think is interesting about this as well is today they integrate with 40 different HR platforms. How many of these platforms are out there that are actually better, but that don't integrate with all of the different product or software products that a company is using, and so they don't get the purchase, even though they offer a much better product. And so companies like Merge create this really interesting potential partnership where these other HR companies that are maybe getting overlooked from the API side can work with Merge and drive additional customers back to their platform, and it becomes a symbiotic relationship that can benefit both players.
I don't know if a market like Indonesia or India would be big enough, but I bet there might be a very similar play of creating an API in a very large market like in India and connecting them.
Yeah, probably. Well, and I think what they would argue is, why do you need to build something that on the API side that's specific to India? Why don't you just add it on as one of the many, 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 different APIs that work on your system?
All right, let's look at the last one. Okay, so Anchor Store, they just raised $102 million, and they are basically just a wholesale marketplace that I believe you can only buy things on if you are wholesaling.
Not if you're wholesaling, if you're a retailer.
Yeah, if you're a retailer.
So the idea here is you have either an online store or even, I believe, a physical location, and you can go and buy product through Anchor Store and sell it through your store, right? And so the nice thing, if you are a vendor, a wholesaler of different products, right? Maybe it's a lot of the stuff they have is like decor, house supplies, specialty items like maple syrup or bath salts, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're one of those companies and you're generating, quite a bit of volume of product, it can be really painful to work with, a small gift shop in New Hampshire that wants to buy, $100 worth of product, right? And to service that one little tiny customer. And so that's what Anchor Store does. That's really interesting is okay, hey, you have this little gift shop. You can get access to all these specialty items all over the place, and your minimum purchase can be $100, which is totally doable for a small store, instead of having to spend a minimum of $1,000 or $10,000, right?
Would that be enough of a deterrent for you not to invest in a company like this?
No, not necessarily. I just think it's, a broader trend that's interesting to think about.
Okay.
The flip side is there are a lot of companies that don't like selling through Amazon. They don't like giving up their data, and they don't like giving up control. And so they're looking for alternative ways to sell product, right? And look, this could be a really interesting thing. You think about how many people start on Etsy. They design some sort of product, they get some initial sales, but then it's okay, if I could take this product that maybe I 3D printed or whatever it might be, and I take it to China and have it mass produced, right? Then I could start selling it not just onesie twosies direct to consumers, but I could actually sell it to smaller boutique sellers that are doing a lot of the curation on behalf of their customers, right? And I could sell a lot more product hypothetically across a broader range of geographies and markets. And so that piece of it of just having a natural evolution of a way to scale up your business without having to make that huge jump is a hole that I think Fair and Anchor Store solve really well.
If you were to invest in one of these three,
yeah,
what would be your preference?
So, I think Anchor Store is probably my favorite of the three, just because I think it's a pretty large, well-established business. I think Bukukas is also really interesting. It just in terms of the amount of growth that they're seeing, it looks like it's a rocket ship. Mm-hmm. But I think Merge is also really interesting. It's just seed stage. It's really early, and I don't know as much about that market and that industry.
I think for myself, I would put Merge first.
Okay.
I think I like that they seem smaller. I like more of that intimate feel. So maybe that's a personal, non-venture model.
Well, you're just swinging for the fences. That's all. You just want to get in early.
Yeah. Well, I also from my standpoint, I'm a founder. So
Sure.
like, I invest more time than money historically.
Yep.
And so I can see more of an upside personally if I were to join them versus the bukakas.
Yeah.
But
You've also kind of felt this pain point here with merge too, right?
Yeah, I felt the pain point, but I would also argue that India is not developed enough for these other companies to have APIs for you to connect into.
Yeah.
And then at that point, when they do, assuming merge does come and gobble up the market, then other people, it would be harder to like do a startup like that when India is ready, if it was ready.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that's how I'd break it down. Well, as I work on this, it'd be interesting to see like what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm excited.
We're recruiting the
We
team
should do
right
a
now for
show
us.
just on like you starting this business and
I don't
talking
know.
about it.
We could. That would be interesting.
It'd be fun.
All right. Sounds good, Peter.
All right. Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe below.